I rode at Lance Armstrong's Tour de France pace for as long as I could, specifically the pace he used to ride up mountains and dominate his opponents.
That's incredible. I couldn't even get to.
I'm going to share how long I lasted, and in order to give it context, you need to understand the massive effort required to ride at that pace. Not just by a normal person like me, even for today's Tour de France pros, Lance's pace was almost unfathomable. Yesterday, I was watching the start of this year's Tour de France, the time trial through Copenhagen. It was a very exciting stage. It was raining, so the speeds were a little slower than they might have been, but it was full of crashes and upsets and surprises. Watching the riders cross the finish line, it's obvious they were giving their all, but it's hard to know what that feels like. Lucky for us, Mathieu van der Poel, one of the top finishers, uploaded his power data from the ride. He averaged a power output of 427 watts. So now we have this number, 427 watts. And I just so happen to have a device that will let me see my own power output in watts, so a plan started forming in my mind. I can compare today's Tour de France pros against Lance Armstrong by putting my bike on a trainer and setting it to the power output of one of today's pros, and then do it again with Lance Armstrong's rides.
All right, here's what it feels like to be Lance Armstrong in 5, 4, 3, 2, 1.
I'm getting ahead of myself again, I'm sorry. I forgot to tell you Lance's numbers. And I realized Van der Poel's rainy day ride probably isn't the best comparison. So I started thinking, who's the best representation of today's World Tour pros? There are a lot of great riders, Filippo Ganna, Primož Roglič, but if we're gonna pick one person to represent pro cycling today, it's gotta be
two-time defending champion, that is Tadej Pogacar.
He's won the Tour de France the last 2 years in a row and is the favorite to win again this year. Looking at his data from last year, we learned Pogacar can ride up a mountain for 30 minutes at 415 watts. Now, at first glance, looking at his numbers, you might think they're lower than Van der Poel. In fact, last time I checked, 415 is lower than 427. But there are two variables those numbers don't account for. First off, Van der Poel was riding fresh. It was the first stage of the race, and it was a time trial, so he only had to ride for those 15 minutes, 30 seconds. Nothing happened before that. Pogacar's 415 watts happened after already riding for 4 or 5 hours in a race. Then, with tired legs, he kicked it up a notch and zoomed up the mountain. But that's not all. When you're going up a mountain, you also have to consider weight. That's why watts over kilogram is the true measure of power when you're riding up mountains. So if you take Van der Poel's 427 watts and divide them by his weight, 75 kilos, you get about 5.7 watts per kilogram, which is insane. And I'll explain exactly how insane in just a bit, but first, Pogacar weighs less, so his 415 watts translates to 6.3 watts per kilogram. That's a lot more than Van der Poel's 5.7. What was Lance Armstrong's watts per kilo, you ask?
You're going pounds, 75 kilos, 165
You're doing
pounds.
7 watts per kilogram, which is...
Yeah, I won every tour at close to 7 watts per kilo.
Okay, we have the numbers, 6.3 watts per kilogram, 7 watts per kilogram. I'm gonna plug those into the trainer and off we go.
All right, here we go. This is what it feels like to be Tadej Pogacar in 5.
Oh my goodness, I'm sorry, I did it to you again. You don't have all the info you need. What do those numbers even mean? What does 1 watt per kilogram feel like, let alone 6 or 7? Unless you know those numbers for yourself, it's really hard to comprehend. So let me share what those numbers feel like to me, and then I promise no more interruptions. We'll do the test. Here is a 30-second history of Mitch on bikes. In the mid-90s, I got my first real bike, a Specialized Hard Rock. It was winter in Minnesota, but I wanted to ride so bad, my dad eventually took me out in the literal freezing winter. -10 degrees Fahrenheit, -23 Celsius. I loved it. In the early 2000s, during high school, I rode my old mountain bike off jumps all summer long with my cousins. We weren't very good. Between high school and the age of 32, I lost my way. I didn't ride much at all. Then 2 years ago, I bought a Giant Revolt 2. I quickly fell in love with riding again, and to be honest, I've been obsessed ever since. I've progressed to a decent level for a weekend warrior. I've done a couple century rides. I average about 8 hours a week on my bike. The Breakaway app, which compares you to cyclists your same age and weight, puts me at an elite level for sprinting, semi-pro for attacking, and sport for climbing. I'm not sure what sport means exactly, but as you can see, it's my weakest area. And of course, that's the area we're going to compare to Pogacar and Armstrong. So let's go. As a warm-up, I'll explain how I'm feeling at different efforts to give you context. I'm starting out at 100 watts. You can see my watts per kilo here. I'm averaging 1.3 watts per kilo. My heart rate's around 120, which is very low for me. I have a high max heart rate for my age, as you'll soon see. This effort, 1.3 watts per kilo, doesn't feel like much to me. I could go on and on and on. Next, we jump up to 170 watts. This is my current zone 2 or endurance pace. As you can see, I'm riding at about 2.3 watts per kilo. My heart rate has jumped up a bit, but overall I'm doing totally fine. This is my century pace, so I can ride this pace for over 100 miles and still be good to go the next day. I can breathe through my nose, I can hold a normal conversation while I'm riding. 235 watts was my first FTP, which is cycling jargon for the amount of power you can sustain for an hour. When I started training a year ago, this effort was a lot for me. It's 3.1 watts per kilo. Now it's my tempo pace. I basically use it anytime I'm riding up a mountain. My highest recorded FTP was 285 watts. It's a bit lower right now. You can see my heart rate's going up. I'm riding at about 3.7 watts per kilo. Like I said, it's not my current FTP. I could not do this for an hour. I could do this for about 20 to 30 minutes, which makes it perfect to compare to Pogacar and Armstrong's 30-minute power. So, quick recap. My 30-minute max, 3.7 watts per kilo. Pogacar, 6.3 watts per kilo, and Armstrong, 7 watts per kilo. That's an extra 3.3 watts per kilo. Lance Armstrong's 30-minute power at the end of a race is almost double my max 30-minute power. So if I ride at 6.3 watts and 7 watts per kilogram respectively, how long am I going to last? Because obviously it's not going to be 30 minutes. Let's find out. On the left, in the grayish-white jersey, is me riding at Pogacar's pace. On the right, in the yellow and black jersey, me riding at Armstrong's pace. We'll put a clock in the middle, and let's see how far I make it for each.
Okay. Oh man.
Yep.
Okay, wow.
Yeah.
Like I'm struggling just to turn the pedals over. I'm like having a hard time staying in the seat. I have to push down so hard. This is so much power. It's insane. All right, starting to feel it now in the legs. All right, 30 seconds in. All right. Hello. Wow. Oh, man, I can't get it. Let's go. All right, there's 1 minute. No. Oh, it's getting harder. Let's get a few minutes. All right. I just couldn't do the power. Super interesting. I could have gone a little harder from a cardiovascular standpoint, but right around a minute 20, a minute 25, it was like my legs started shutting down and it was harder to turn the pedals over. That's incredible. He does that for like 30 minutes. I couldn't even get to 2. Oh man.
So, what's the lesson here? My takeaway is pros. They're not like the rest of us. This kind of effort is crazy to me. I feel like I still don't fully comprehend it. By the way, if you like content like this, please subscribe. And I've got one more little thing to share with you. Did you notice the sticky note on the TV?
So these are the times that theoretically I should be able to hold the efforts.
Before filming, my coach, Ryan Thomas at the RCA, calculated how long I would be able to hold the efforts based on my critical power, a testing protocol that I know nothing about. I performed the test. I don't know how it works. But look how dead on the estimates were. That's super cool. If you want to know more about critical power and how to test it, let me know in the comments, and I'll make a video with my coach about it, because he knows how it works. And remember, the pros, they're not like the rest of us. But it's still fun to ride a bike.